Hi and welcome to another video, and again thank you for the support on the other videos and for the feedback on it. Again, we've got another one here that has come from someone who watches the videos and hi and welcome to another video, and thank you for the support on the last video. Again, this video today actually comes directly from one of the people who watches my videos that have sent me in. It's an old family story and it could be quite short, but I hope you're going to find it interesting and stick to it, because at the end there's a bit of a twist and it sort of explains why I can't identify the house. You'll see as we go on. This video starts in Orsett village, and it's a small cottage just on the outskirts of the village. Now this is in 1930 and a young couple move in, which is Peter and Ivy. Now they go on to have two children who they have grandchildren. It's the grandchildren that relayed the story to me. So in 1930 they move in, and there's quite a lot of work that needs to be done to the cottage, and there's always this horrible stenchy smell in there that they could never get rid of for quite a few years, but eventually they did. The children grew up and eventually moved out, and the time went on and they had quite a happy life in there. Now Ivy was quite a lonesome lady. She would often sit in the kitchen on her own, and she'd be doing like embroidery and stuff like that. But Peter was very active in his community. He went out and done quite a lot of stuff, and he actually made friends over in Ockenden, so he'd go over to Ockenden, and he had an allotment over in Ockenden, funny enough, where my granddad had an allotment, which they may have even met, I don't know. But they lived a very full life, and sadly in 1981 Peter passed away. Now it was quite a short illness, and it was quite a shock to the whole of the family. Now by this time obviously their children had children, and the grandchildren all rode around to try and support Ivy, and she said that she was okay, but they'd pop in every day to see her and make sure she needed everything. At this time Ivy was 70, so she was still quite active, but again her, not say a lonely personality, but more of the quieter side of her personality didn't really make her go out into the wider community. She didn't really have many friends that she'd go out to tea with and stuff like that, but she still had people in the local village that would walk along out to her cottage and go in and have a cup of tea with her. And this was something they'd do like at least once or twice a week. So the community was sort of got together, supported her, make sure she wasn't lonely. The family, the grandchildren were going in there and checking up on her. So this is the year that Peter had died, and she had quite a support there. She became more guarded on the people that she let come into her house, and she'd often say that you can't come over because she had someone over. Now the grandchildren would go there, and they would say they would smell pipe tobacco, and Ivy would say, "Oh, George has just left, and he lives down the street, and he smokes a pipe tobacco here." And the grandchildren didn't really think nothing of it. But this went on for quite some time, and they've never seen this George. And they turn around and ask people in the village, have they ever seen George? And they're like, "No, we don't know who George is. We've not heard of him, but we do know that Ivy does talk about him. When we go around now, she says, oh, George said this, George said that, and George was telling her about the past and about all the stuff that he used to do, and it seemed like quite a nice mutual friendship they'd had." So the grandchildren and that wasn't really concerned about it. Going forward into 1982, the grandchildren were carried on going around now, and then one day both the grandchildren were in the kitchen area, where Ivy would sit at a little table where she used to do an embroidery, but she had the old type of kettle with the tea cosy on it. I remember my nan and grad used to have one of those tea cosy ones, and they used to brew up the tea, and then it'd see them through the next hour or so. They just sit there drinking copious cups of tea. A very British thing to do, isn't it, really? But nowadays it's more coffee, isn't it, I think. I know I always have my coffee all the time. But going back to Ivy, that she'd sit there and it'd be like the tea cakes and that. So when the grandchildren come over, she always made sure she had cakes or bread or something like that she'd have on the table with them, with a cup of tea ready whenever they needed it. Right on the side of the kitchen was a built-in unit in the wall, and this was where they used to keep things like the towels and tablecloths and things like that. And there was two big wrought iron candles that their parents remember them being there when they were children. Now as grandchildren, they were never allowed to take stuff out of that cupboard. I remember my nan having a room where you couldn't really go in there and touch things, or they always supposed to have these ornaments that you're always scared to touch in case you broke them or something like that. But they were scared never to touch these 2 candles. And then one day they was around there and their nan asked them to take some new tablecloths out, and they took the tablecloths out and they took the 2 candlesticks out and they put them on the side. They laid the tablecloth over the table. When they turned round, the candlesticks were back in the cupboard. And one of the grandchildren said to the other grandchild, did you put them in there? And they said, no, I didn't do that. And they sort of looked at each other, and they know the nan didn't do it because she was sitting at the table waiting for them to get everything ready for her. They just thought it was a bit strange. And at the same time, they noticed this smell of pipe tobacco starting to fill the room. And they said to Nan, can you smell that? And she's like, no, I can't smell that. And she acted a little bit off, as if either they were making a fuss or, just didn't acknowledge it at all. That evening, they went home and they called their parents and said, Nan was a bit strange today. And they said about the candles, and they said about the pipe tobacco smell. And their parents turned around and said, well, actually, when we was growing up in the house, we would get this smell of pipe tobacco come up, and it'd be really, really strong. And he said, but it only tends to happen when we used to put the candles out. We used to light the candles, and we'd think it was the candles that were making the smell. And she said that's why the candles always tend to be kept in that bottom cupboard. But quite often they'd come down in the morning, and the candles have been taken out of the cupboard and put back up onto the mantelpiece that went along the back of the kitchen. And that just sparked more interest in the grandchildren, going, well, we took the candles out to get the tablecloths out, and that is when we had that smell. And their parents jokingly turned around and said, it's probably haunted. And they said, well, seriously, did you ever feel that when you lived there? They said, well, they used to have some strange things going. They'd hear sort of like creaking or crackling going on, but it was an old building. All the floorboards were sort of like big oak floorboards, and one of those really old, well-made cottages. So they didn't really think nothing of it. But they said sometimes they would think they'd catch a glimpse of a man in the house. In the corner of their eye, they'd think there was someone there, and it will just go. And they said there was one time when one of the youngest children fell over and hit their head. They swear that they see a man come up to them and tap them on the head to tell them that it was going to be okay, and that everything's safe. Your mum's going to come along and everything's fine. But that never happened. There's no one else in the house with them. The mum was there. She was in the kitchen. She heard them fall, and they run down there and they looked after them. But the youngest child swears that she thought someone had come up to her. Now, Peter and Ivy actually had 2 children, and that's Pamela and Stephen. And it was Stephen's children that were the grandchildren that visited the most. And they were the ones that had been there that day with the candles. And Stephen said to his kids, well, why don't you ask Nan about the bowl? And they said, what do you mean about the bowl? He said, well, when me and my sister were there growing up, we found an old bowl in the garden, and we brought it in, and Nan cleaned it up, and she put some flowers in it. And she goes, but every time we went away, and they used to go over to Kent, and you do some like hot picking and all that over in Kent. But when they used to come back, the bowl had been emptied, all the dirt had been emptied out, and had been cleaned and was put back on side the washing board area. And they said, well, somebody must have been doing that. They went, ask Nan about it. So the grandchildren went over and they went, Nan, they said, we've got to ask you about the bowl. And she went, oh, this bowl. And she produced this bowl. And it wasn't nothing special. It was just like it had a few like flowers stenciled or engraved on the outside of it all. And she said, she goes, this is the magic bowl. And she goes, you know about the magic porridge bowl that always fills up? She goes, well, this one always is empty. And they laughed and joked about it. But the Nan did relay the story to them that when it was found in the garden, that every time she put flowers or anything like that in it, it would just empty up. And she thought her husband was having a joke with her. So they'd sort of like laugh and joke about it. He swears he was never doing it, but the bowl would always be emptied. So in my head, I just started thinking, was it one of those a potty that you put under the bed? I don't know why that just come into my head. And that's why it was always empty. Which is like, It might have been, I don't know. I haven't seen it. They described it to me as just a bowl with flowers on it. Now I'm thinking maybe it was a potty and it should be empty. It could be. And he keeps panicking that they're filling it up with dirt and yeah. But anyway, the pot was emptied. I've just thought that's terrible, isn't it? But it could be true, couldn't it? It could be that. But anyway, the nan said, yeah, they'd go away. And the pot was always washed up, cleaned and put on the side. So when they come back, and they said one year they knew they was going to go away, so they left the pot and they put all this dirt in it. And they didn't bother putting flowers in it because like they knew it was going to happen. They just filled it up with dirt, and sure enough, when they come back, the pot was clean and emptied. And they was just like, couldn't ever work out. They thought obviously no one was breaking in, and they just thought one and each other were having a little bit of joke with them. But obviously that wasn't the case. So the grandkids are like, oh, well, your ass is haunted, Nan, isn't it? It's like, taking the mickey out of her. And she said, oh no. She goes, we've only got friendly people here. So moving on after 1982, the people of the village would still pop round and have cups of tea with her. One of them actually contacted Stephen the son and said, do you want to check in on your mum? We walked past and we see her in the kitchen and she was sitting at the table and she was like talking to someone, but there was no one there. And Stephen was like, that's a bit weird, isn't it? So he phoned up the grandkids, and the grandkids were easier to get to, and they went down there, and they went in and said, Nanny, are you okay? People have said that they've seen you sitting here talking to yourself. She goes, I'm not talking to myself. She goes, no, George pops over, and she goes, you probably just can't see him out the corner or something like that. And they go, well, can we meet George? And she goes, oh no, he's very not a very social person, and he takes a long time to come up here on the bus, and sometimes he'll ride a bike or something like that to come up here. She never knows when he's really going to turn up. And they're like, okay, fair enough. And it's a reasonable explanation that people just walking past or walking up to see her look through the window or and they couldn't see anyone else sitting there. They fed that back. The grandchildren are the easiest ones to get there. They live more locally. In 1985, Ivy had a fall, and the neighbours contacted the grandchildren, and they got round there very, very quickly. And Ivy started talking about, can you let George know? Can you let George know? And they said, well, we've got no contact details for George. No, back then, obviously, we didn't have mobile phones, and we didn't have everyone's numbers polled in, and you didn't have their numbers programmed in. I mean, back in 81 or 85, I think I still had the lock that you had to put a key in on the dial thing on the phone, and using the phone was a privilege, and if you used it, you'd always be sitting there with a timer saying, get off the phone, get off the phone. Strange to think that don't seem very long ago, and now we've got mobile phones that we film stuff like this on. It's just crazy. Digressing, going all over the place on this one. It may be a short video. It ain't going to be a short video. I'm waffling too much and getting giggles. You don't know how many times I've had to stop this video because I'm going to a fit of giggles at the moment. Still got potties on my mind. Right. I'm losing track. Lucky I've got it written down here, and I'm losing track. It's just, yeah, okay. So 1985, Ivy had a fall. The grandchildren got called, and Stephen went over there, and when he got there, Ivy said, can you tell George? George, they had no contact details for, and they couldn't get hold of it. She said, you don't need to have contact details, just tell someone in the village to get hold of George. That was like, people in the village don't know who George is, and what we're meant to do. Anyway, Ivy went off to the hospital, and the grandchildren, they stood there, and it had been quite a bit of a mess. She'd actually been coming down the stairs with her dinner tray, and she had fallen, and all the food had gone all over the floor. And again, they went to the cupboard to get some towels out, and they had to move those candles. As they did so, all the lights in the cottage just blacked out. And again, they could smell this pipe tobacco smell wafting through the building. This totally freaked me out. And he said, when it happened, he goes, I didn't know what to do. He goes, no, I'm sitting there. He goes, I was on my own, and all of a sudden all the lights had gone out in this cottage. I'm already freaked out because I heard about the potty and what happened to the candlesticks before. He goes, the first thing I've done was shove the candlesticks back in the cupboard. He goes, and lucky enough, the lights did come back on after a couple of minutes. He goes, but it was probably just like a neighbourhood thing. He goes, but this smell was really strong. He goes, and I couldn't work out where it's coming from. He goes, I was sniffing around. He goes, I'm sure it's coming through the floorboards. It's an old building, so perhaps the people who used to live there before used to be really, really heavy pipe smokers, and it's just like in the walls. He goes, but his mum mentioned it before, so that she knows that it was there, even when they were kids. So there's maybe something natural about it. But he cleaned up all the food that was over the floor, put the trays away, and he put the trays on the sides of the unit where that pot was. And then once it had been brought back out, that pot was kept back on the side of the unit. Nothing in it, just like bits and bobs all were left there. And he turned around, he knocked the pot, and the pot fell down and smashed on the floor. And he was guilt-ridden. He was like, I broke a pot. And he bagged it all up, put it on the side. And after a while, he was more concerned, obviously, about getting back, seeing how his name was. He phoned his parents up and went, well, I broke a pot. And went, oh, don't worry about it. It's useless. It's like no value or anything like that. After a couple of days, Ivy was let home back from the hospital, and it's actually Pamela who brought her back. And they went in there and they get in there all comfortable and set up. Pamela went into the kitchen to make her some tea, and she was expecting to see, she was told to get the bag of broken bits, hide it, and then Ivy will probably never know it had happened. And she went there, she was looking for it, and the pot was on the sides of the unit in perfect condition, no cracks, no breaks or anything. And she thought perhaps I was having a wind up, but it wasn't. It was, this pot was back where it was. So now we move through to the storm of 1987. Now Ivy had a big tree that was outside the house, and it fell over and it caught the side of the building. And although this wasn't become massively important right now, it would have a later consequences as we quickly go on. It had damaged a corner of the building, and it caused some damp that would go across the floorboards. Now that was all repaired, and over the years again, Ivy was still sitting there. She still kept her routine, sitting there in cups of tea, cups of coffee, and she's getting a lot older now. She's like in her late 80s, and the children were looking after her. It's kind of like now like mid-90s, and they were getting concerned. They was thinking about, is she okay there? And again, she's convinced she's fine. Her friend George comes around, keeps her company, and he stays sometimes till quite late at night. They sit there, they chat all about the old times and about what he used to do, and she kept repeating the same stuff again and again, the same stuff. And the grandchildren were fine with that. She seemed happy, and the parents were fine with that. They've never met this George, and again, they went. Well, also a few doors down because there's nothing joining that cottage, but they went down and they still meet the old neighbours there, and they go, yeah, she's fine. She keeps herself to herself, and she walks up to the grocery shop and gets her shopping, goes back, and she's doing well for her age. She's keeping herself fit, looking after herself. And they said, but we do see her still sitting in the kitchen, or sometimes they see her standing in the garden talking as if someone's there and no one is there. And that was obviously, now we probably think of something like dementia or Alzheimer's. But knowing that she had been talking about George for a long time, they're now thinking perhaps that there may be some mental health problem going on. And that raised some concerns, and they had her checked out by the doctors. They said she seems like pretty together. There's no signs of anything like that. Now, keep in mind that you're looking at 95. We know a lot more about mental health and about dementia and Alzheimer's now than we did then. Perhaps it was early onset, we don't know. But unfortunately, in 2000, Ivy would pass away. She was 90, so she had a good innings. But this did mean that the house was going to be split over the family and the grandchildren, so it went up for sale. But where the storm damage had caused the problems, they had to repair quite a lot of that end of the cottage, and that runs straight under the kitchen area. So a lot of the floorboards have gone completely mouldy and rotted. So Stephen, being quite a dab hand at stuff, he decided he was going to go in now and put up these flooring boards. Him, Pamela had come down, and he had a couple of mates down to help him. They made a weekend of it, so put up all these boards, replaced them, as they pulled up these boards, they found underneath it was a box. And they were like a bit, oh, no, what are we going to find in there? They opened it up, and they said it was like a shoebox size. And inside it was a pipe, like a smoker's pipe. And there's a box next to it that had like a vase in it. And they picked it up, and on the side of it was George. It had no last name, it just said George. And they opened it up, and it was ashes. Now, Pamela joked maybe it was about tobacco, or maybe it was even a pet called George or something like that. But they're pretty sure that these were human remains in the ashes. And they're a little bit freaked out about it, knowing what I've been saying about meeting George and talking to George. And the pipe they took down to the local museum, and they were told the pipe was from at least 1890. It might have been a little bit earlier than that. And the urn was a typical sort of ashes urn from that time period. And they said, but it's buried under the floorboards. They said it wasn't a common thing to do, you know, it's quite unusual. But if somebody couldn't really afford anything, they'd keep the urn with them. Which again today, you know, people do keep people's ashes in the house. And they believe, going back through the history, that the old owner was George and his wife. And George died, and his wife got his ashes, didn't want to get rid of, and apparently George had loved the house, so she buried the ashes under the floorboards and put his pipe in the box with it. Now this is where the grandchildren said that they thought, well, we've got this pot and we're going to take it down and try and get a date for the pot. And the date of the pot coming in sort of like 1820, so that pot was obviously going to be in that house at that time. And you know, the candlesticks, what the nan had never turned around and said, the candlesticks were of the same age, so they're probably originally items from the cottage that had always been there, now since George had lived there. And now it seems that he see the sadness in Ivy after her husband passed away, and he befriended her as a spirit, as a ghost. And apparently, you know, what we gather, he must have been sitting there. He was the one that she was talking to across the table, and the one talking to in the garden, and they kept her company all the time that she was alive after her husband passed away. And I guess it's quite a reassuring thing. The grandchildren certainly took comfort from the fact that maybe they didn't really believe in ghosts, but everything was adding up that way. And they're thinking, oh, what do we do now? Because we've got these ashes. And what do we do? We've got to sell the building. And this is where it comes a little bit tricky, and why I can't identify the house. Ivy was cremated. What I decided to do, I shouldn't laugh because they're going to watch this video. I don't mean it. Right? Don't take offence. I'm laughing, right? Because this is serious. But you laughed when you told me, right? So, right, what they did, they took some of George's ashes and put it onto Ivy's grave. They took some of Ivy's ashes and put it into the box next to George, put it back into the building with George's pipe, and put the floorboards back over. So that means whoever owns this cottage now, they're still under the floorboards. So, can you imagine that? You're going to dig up their house, and not only you've got a pot with George on it, they've got this little pot with Ivy in it. I'm really sorry. Look, I know, you know, it was your name, and I really put it. I just love this story. I just think it's brilliant. And when you told me, I had to tell it because it's one of those ghost stories that almost has to be true. Sorry, this is a right mess of a video. But yeah, it's a great tale. I love it. It's obviously I can't identify the cottage because of that, and there's probably laws against it. Was it regardless disposal of human remains or something like that? But I think it's lovely. George and Ivy, and George has probably met her husband there, and so he's met Peter, and they're all probably having a good laugh about it. And yeah, don't hate me for laughing about it, will you? But yeah, anyway, thank you for the support. Subscribe, hit the follow button, share it. Please comment below on the video on YouTube. It really helps me get out there. Share it, take the mickey out of me, whatever. Hope you enjoy the videos, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you. Bye.